Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous nights of Ukrainian time. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. The Ramstein meeting has ended and we have a lot of very interesting results. First of all, we have some picture of the supply that the Western countries, NATO countries promised Ukraine to provide. United States of America will give Ukraine 250 millions. The Canada will provide Ukraine 389 millions for 5 years. United Kingdom is going to send Ukraine 162 million pounds. France is going to give Ukraine 80 million euro, and Sweden and Spain are going to provide additional help. So, but these some people are saying, some military experts are saying that this is the weakest results of the Ramstein meeting. But the most important part of this meeting was not to talk about the weapon that to provide Ukraine, but the most important question that these parties were discussing is the authorization of Ukraine to attack the territory deep inside of old Russia. And for example, France and United Kingdom approved strikes deep into the territory of the old Russian regions using the Scalp and Storm Shadow cruise missiles transferred to Kiev. As for the United States of America, they still have some doubts whether to allow Ukrainians to do this or not. Lloyd Austin doesn't want to let Zelensky use long-range weapons in Russia. Zelensky will present his plan for victory to Biden, and the most important statement of the head of the Pentagon that the conflict in Ukraine will end at the negotiation table, but the US will not judge when exactly. So we understand that the United States of America have some doubts because they first want to see the red lines of Russian Federation and what kind of reaction the Russians are going to show when the Ukrainians begin using the Western, let's say, Scalp and Storm Shadow missiles deep inside the territory of Russia. If the United States of America see no reaction from the Russian side, obviously they will allow the Ukrainians to use the United States missiles deep inside the territory of Russia. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground. We have a lot of very interesting updates, and very interesting and very weird updates are coming from the Kherson direction, where the Russians managed to conduct something like a special operations, understand, and to improve their positions along the islands. And if you take a look at this map, you're gonna see that the Russians crossed Dnipro River and basically landed on the Ukrainian side. We will not watch this video because there are lots of very strange, weird episodes that's not good to show. But if you have access to map, you will be able to see this. So summarizing everything, the Russians crossed Dnipro River, and currently probably it's not like a regular armies, understand, but probably this is sabotage and reconnaissance group that began reconnaissance operation exactly on the Ukrainian side. And you know, as for the Kyzyomys area, let's increase the numbers of update, for example, since the beginning of June, and we're gonna see significant number of Russian FPV drone strikes, missile strikes. Basically, Kyzyomys, this small Kyzyomys, the village of Kyzyomys, the village of we have Dniprovsk, so all the settlements along Dnipro River in this part of Kherson area is something like Prichistovka in the South Donetsk direction, is something like Verkhnyakamyanska in the Siversk direction. We are talking about the number of Russian missile, FPV drone and artillery strikes, and we are talking about that every single square centimeter in these territories were bombed and attacked by the Russians. So we don't have, let's say, any idea whether the Russians are planning to cross and to establish the foothold in this part, but everything might happen because, as we discussed in the previous updates, the Ukrainians were forced to redeploy significant number of forces from many directions to the Pokrovsk area, including the let's say the positions and the forces from the Kherson area to stabilize that territories. Now let's move further and let's talk about the South Donetsk direction. We have some additional updates about the situation on the ground. We have just one video published by the Russian sources of how they were bombing and attacking the city of Ugledar, the coal mine, and the city of Vadiana. A lot of artillery strikes, a lot of FPV drone attacks. So everything, there is a full-scale offensive operation from the Russian side. Obviously, we have no doubts, but still we see that it's just very heavy artillery strikes, big intensity of this let's say activity, but without any changes on the ground, without any attempts to capture the village and the city of Ugledar, the village of Vadiana and city of Ugledar by attacking on the ground. Now let's move further and let's continue with the Pokrovsk direction, where we start receiving very interesting details and updates. First, let's talk about Krasnogorovka once again. If you remember, just yesterday we were talking about that the Russians managed to establish complete control over the territory. We have just one photo with the Russian flag. The building was geolocated, but today on the 7th of September in the morning of Ukrainian time, we got another additional video that confirms complete control over these fields, not just over the northern part of Krasnogorovka, but also over the fields and the fortifications to the north of the city. In this video, we can see 5 Russian soldiers who were raising Russian flag, who was waving this flag right exactly in the point that you can see in the map. So but this video confirms, this is another confirmation that the Russians established complete control over the territory. Furthermore, some Russian sources reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish complete control also over the northwestern part. We're talking about this small part of Krasnogorovka with significant number of buildings. So according to some sources, this territory was also captured. So for now, we don't have any geolocations that can confirm it, so that's why we will keep this territory under Ukraine control. Now let's talk about Ukrainsk. Today we have additional changes on the ground from pro-Ukrainian mappers. Deep State reported that the Russians managed to enter the city of Ukrainsk from the south, and currently there are very heavy clashes exactly for this high-rise building area. So basically the clashes are taking place for the school number 13. Obviously this is very important, and we see that the Russians decided not to fight for Selidova. We'll discuss this in a minute. They decided first to capture Ukrainsk and then to think what to do next. So the clashes are going to take place in this village today, in the city today and tomorrow. So let's wait for additional updates, but something tells me that Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area. Now let's talk about Selidova. According to information we have, the Ukrainians began the counter-offensive operation. During the previous night, we got lots of very interesting updates, a lot of very interesting episodes and videos that came from this area. The Ukrainian sources published the very big video of how they were counter-attacking the Russian forces in the village of Mikhailovka. From one side, this video confirms that Mikhailovka is under complete Russian control, not just the part of Mikhailovka that was colored in Russian favor before this morning. We have, as you can see, added additional territory under complete Russian control. On the other hand, this video confirms that Ukrainians managed to regroup, managed to bring additional forces, and began their own counter-offensive with the purpose to force the Russians to fall back. So all these icons, blue icons with yellow AK-47, means that in every single point there were Ukrainian activity, Ukraine attempt to counterattack using the personal carriers and armored vehicles without any landing operations. So as you can see, the Ukrainians can enter the territory, can counterattack, but yet they haven't started landing operation and clearing operation. So which confirms that there are Russian positions and that the Russians still hold the area. Furthermore, based on this video, we have adjusted the map in the southern part of Krasnogorovka, including the hospital. That, if you remember, for the previous few days, we've been talking a lot that this territory was captured by the Russians, but now we have 100% sure evidence that most likely that was maybe something like sabotage and reconnaissance Russian groups that managed to get there, but now they were forced to fall back. Now let's talk to Novogrodovka. We have additional changes on the ground, small changes on the ground in Russian favor. We can see the presence of the Russian forces in the northern part of the cemetery. Yet we haven't received anything from Marinovka, which confirms that the Russians are trying and making more and more attempts to attack Marinovka from the north, but yet haven't managed to establish control over the territory. As for Pokrovsk itself, there are very heavy clashes right now, and the Ukrainian sources began spreading the information that Ukrainians have concentrated a significant number of forces and began their own counterattacks in the Pokrovsk direction with the purpose to force the Russians to fall back from Novogrodovka, to force the Russians to fall back from Grodovka itself and from the landfills and the terikons. The Ukrainians realized that during the Russian biggest Pokrovsk offensive operation, they lost control for over more than 70% of the landfills and the strategical heights, and now they need to restore control over them. Without them, when the Russians finish the battle for Ukrainsk and Girnik, the Ukrainians will have no chances to hold this territory for a very long time. On the other side, the Russians understand the situation. Now they're mainly concentrated on the Krasnogorovka, Nivoyska, Girnik, Ukrainsk. So that's why the Russians, they still understand they need maybe 2 or 3 weeks to finish this part of the Pokrovsk offensive operation. So that's why During the previous night, the Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian Logistic, and according to information we have, as a result of another missile strike or aviation strike, bomb strike, the Russians destroyed the bridge completely. This is not going to ruin the Ukrainian Logistic completely, obviously, but it will make it much more difficult. Furthermore, the Russians reported that they continue bombing and attacking the city of Pavlograd, and today we have another video, another explosion, and this is another city that lays on the main logistic between Zaporozhye, Dnipro. So it's like a line, supply line, Dnipro, Zaporozhye, Pavlograd, and then Pokrovsk. And as you can see, the Russians control the entire line, control the main supply arteria, and they're trying to slow down the Ukrainians. So as you can see, we are talking about this line. This is the city of Dnipro, then it goes to Pavlograd, and then from Pavlograd it goes to Pokrovsk. So this is one supply road, and the Ukrainians are using this supply road to get forces from the Kursk direction, because there is another railways that go to Krasnograd and then to Kharkiv and then to Sumy. So Pavlograd is under very heavy fire from the Russian side, and Pavlograd as well. So all these two cities, the chains of very important supply arteria, and the Russians understand this, and they try to reduce the Ukrainian possibilities. And as I understand, for now everything is more or less they're doing successfully. Now let's move further. We haven't received anything from Toretsk, New York, just regular activity. The same story about Chasiv Yar, just regular activity. The Kupiansk direction, the same story. We're expecting for additional updates, because the sources reported about activization of the Russian forces further in direction of Oskol River. And now we are moving to the Kupiansk, to the Kursk direction. We have very interesting updates and very interesting changes on the ground. Currently, there are very heavy clashes in 2 points. The first point is the village of Koreneva and the city of Koreneva. And as you can see, according to the recent geolocations that were published by the Russian sources, the Russians managed to restore complete control over the village of Koreneva itself, over the city of Koreneva, and the Russians managed to improve their positions further deep inside of the territory that was captured by the Ukrainians during the first days of the Kursk offensive operation. As you can see, based on the video, based on the geolocations that we received during the previous night of Ukrainian time, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. We have added the central part, the almost a 70-80% of the southeastern part of Koreneva village under complete Russian control, and we have added 3 lines further in direction of Ukrainian positions, also under complete Russian control, due to this, based on this video. And in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the edge Russian positions in this direction. So the Ukrainians haven't managed to establish control over the city, and now they are forced to fall back, and they're falling back. Most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from the Olgovka as well, and the Russians are pushing. But the main clashes from the Ukrainian side are taking place for these territories. You can see we still, since the beginning of the Kursk offensive operation, haven't received anything from the village of Nikolsky, Malaya Loknya, Staraya Sorochina, Nova Sorochina, and Kruglinka. So these territories, according to different mappers, were already captured by the Ukrainian side. We don't believe this. We think that there are still Russian soldiers. There are still Russian soldiers who are fighting with the Ukrainians in the full encirclement. Yeah, we don't know for sure the exact number of Russian soldiers that are located in this area, but the Ukrainians, as I understand, are trying to encircle the Russians here. There is one supply road through the fields, through the forest, between Russian positions and the villages of Kamyshevka, Dyakovka, and Leontievka. So these are supply roads, and the Ukrainians are trying to attack the Russians using the pincer tactics. The Ukrainians are attacking the Russians from the northwest, and the Ukrainians are trying to attack the Russians from the northeast, trying to encircle them and to meet. They try to meet both pincers exactly in this point, and we have a lot of geolocations that confirms additional Ukrainian progress from one side and from another. Very likely that the Russians may be encircled by the Ukrainians. Currently, we don't know for sure what the Russians are planning to do with this, because either they need to begin evacuation right now, or a significant number of Russian soldiers may be encircled, or maybe the Russians are using these tactics, allowing the Ukrainians to think that they are able to encircle the Russians. And obviously we understand that while the Ukrainians are moving, they are suffering significant losses, because the Russians are bombing and attacking the Ukrainians with stealth flamethrower systems, with aviation, with helicopters, with tanks, with artillery, with FPV drones, with sabotage and reconnaissance drones. So to encircle this group of Russian forces, the Ukrainians suffer significant losses. So let's wait for additional day what is going to happen during the upcoming 24 hours. Everything might happen, and obviously either the Russians can be encircled or the Ukrainians can be completely defeated, and this might be the turning point in the Kursk offensive operation, because we see that Ukrainians went all in, and if they lose this battle, if they lose this encirclement, and after the calculation of their all losses they suffer, this might be like the end of the Kursk offensive, and then the Ukrainians would begin their falling back towards the border, because we see that the Ukrainians went all in. They decided to redeploy forces from Korinyevo village, because they see that they don't have enough of forces for this. They have redeployed them in direction of this cauldron, and now they're suffering problems in this direction the Russians are pushing, and everything might happen in this area as well. So let's wait for additional day, and obviously we're gonna understand everything. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.